Hey there, and welcome to another Health Essentials podcast. I'm John Horton, your host. You've no doubt heard of someone being described as having a type A personality. It's a label placed on folks viewed as hyper-competitive and ambitious, the sort of person who believes perfection is the only acceptable outcome. These traits can serve as fuel for success. They can also ratchet up pressure and stress to some seriously unhealthy levels. So is it good or bad to be a type A? Or is the answer somewhere in between? For questions like that, we call in psychologist Grace Tworek for information and analysis. Dr. Tworek is one of the many experts at Cleveland Clinic who pop into our weekly podcast to help us learn more about ourselves. Now let's get started on this discussion. Type A's, after all, aren't exactly known for their patience. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Tworek. It has been way too long since you've stopped by to chat.
Thank you so much for having me back, John. It's always great to be here, so I appreciate it.
Well, we love having you. Our topic today, we all tend to think of the type A designation as a psychological sort of assessment, which is obviously why you're here. But my mind was blown away when I learned that the term originated from a pair of cardiologists in the 1950s who saw the behavior pattern as a coronary risk.
That is something that I actually had forgotten. That was a tidbit I knew back in grad school. And then when you brought it up to me, I said, oh my gosh, you're right. That is where that came from. It's one of those fun tidbits, though, that sometimes I myself forget, but it is like a good party conversation, right? Well,
it's surprising, but it kind of makes sense if you know anybody who kind of shows those type A tendencies.
That is so true, right? I think all of us have an image that pops to the top of our head when we think about the type A personality, right? It might be somebody in our personal life or even someone from television or social media. We all kind of have that characteristic image of what a type A personality is, for sure.
Well, let's get into that a little bit because, other than being a potential matter of the heart, kind of break down what it means to have a type A personality.
Sure. So when we're speaking about personality types per se, we're really categorizing folks based on common characteristics. And really, depending on where you're gathering your information for what it means to be a type A personality versus type B, you might come across more than one or two of these categories. So oftentimes what we hear is type A is more rigid, type B maybe more creative or scattered, and even a type C being more passive in nature or more likely to let things kind of roll off their shoulders.
Like looking specifically at type A personalities, let's kind of get into some of the common traits that are connected to that.
Sure. So when we think about some of the more common traits connected to being type A, we think about being driven or goal-oriented, so having an overarching goal that you're working towards, really driving you, giving you energy, being organized. Everything has a place. Everything has a way that it should be. Time urgency being another one, right? Deadlines. Oftentimes type A personalities work great under deadlines. They know when something is due and they're going to have it done at that time or possibly even before that time. I've even heard aggressiveness or controlling in nature. So they really like things done a certain way, and it motivates them to know what that way is, how that's going to happen, and to have a little bit of control over how that might potentially play out. And maybe even at times I've heard some, impatience or frustration with others who don't stick to those same timelines. So maybe they might not play as well with others who don't see the value of those timelines, deadlines, or even overarching goals.
Competitiveness is also a big driving trait, right? Because you hear them. I mean, these are the people who just do not want to lose and will do anything possible to avoid it.
You're so right. And something that we hear a lot, especially around big sporting events or events like the Olympics, we hear a lot of athletes say, I'm a type A personality and I've always liked to win. And I've always seen myself up on that podium winning that gold, right? So maybe there is something to that. But of course, it is important for us to know that a lot of these traits can occur on a spectrum. So not all folks who are very motivated and goal-oriented might engage in that behavior at the same level in every aspect of their life. I like to kind of refer to this as like a volume kind of meter, right? Like they might be at a 10 when it comes to something they're very passionate about, but this same person might not always be at a 10 when it comes to competitiveness in other areas of their life too. And that can really depend on the situation, goals, and other external factors too.
Well, and that's where it is hard. When we get into these real general terms, I mean, it's a big label when you're trying to just fit everybody into either a type A or a B or a C. There's going to be a huge range within that.
So true. So true. And I think that's part of being human, right? Is that in different places and different contexts and with different people, we might be a little bit different depending on circumstances.
All right. Well, I have to tell you, confession, everything that you just described, I'm really seeing myself in there. So I'm almost considering this a little session, that I can use for a little growth. So all those traits that you just talked about, you kind of understand them and we all see them in some people. But they also sound like things that can be very stressful.
Sure.
Were those heart docs onto something back in the 50s?
So just like I alluded to a little bit earlier, not all folks who demonstrate these type A characteristics or these type A kind of thing categories or bin we would put type A people into do so on the same level. So there might be some folks who find they are incredibly successful because they're able to take a goal, break it down, give themselves a timeline or a deadline and meet those goals, kind of check off all of those manageable steps, and that works for them really well. However, for some other people, these same traits could cause them to experience anxiety, or they could even get feedback from friends or colleagues that they're hard to work with because they're not the most flexible with other people, or they might not be the most open to adjusting that timeline or adjusting that goal. So I would say that it really depends on the person, and it's really important for us to note that there has been a lot of research in the past surrounding different types of personalities and whether they may be more at risk for certain conditions, just like we're talking about. But more recent research has actually outlined some scientific flaws of those studies in the past. So we can't 100% say that there are direct links or you might be more at risk for a certain health diagnosis because of those personality traits.
So if you check a lot of boxes for a type A personality, what can you do to kind of maximize the benefits of that? Stuff that we're talking about with being driven and deadline oriented and all that stuff, to maximize that without drifting too far into the negatives that you just mentioned.
Sure. So someone that really identifies with some of those traits and the things that we've talked about so far, and you find that they are benefiting you and that you're thriving in what you're doing, try not to worry too much about that. Embrace that these traits work for you. But something that you can consider is speaking to other important people in your life and saying, hey, is this also a way that you feel motivated? Does setting deadlines and having an overarching goal give you energy like it does for me? And maybe that answer is yes. And maybe that answer is no. But by having these types of conversations and understanding the people around us, we can actually kind of flex the personality characteristics that we have to better understand people in our own lives. And this could improve our relationships at work, at home, and with friends.
Do you find sometimes that people who maybe have this type A personality, might have kind of blinders on to some of what they're doing and its effect on people around them, just because, you're so driven and so focused that you just don't realize maybe, kind of what's going on around you?
Certainly so. And that might be where taking a step back and recognizing, maybe looking in the mirror for a second and saying, wait, have I gotten some feedback from maybe a loved one, maybe my partner, or even at work that I am a little bit rigid or I'm hard to work with? And is that something that I'm hearing often? And if that resonates with you, maybe this is kind of that light bulb moment to have some deeper conversations and look inward a little bit to see if that could be affecting those around you. So
now you had mentioned as far as the people around you. So if you're one of those people who live with a type A personality or work with someone that kind of falls in that area, what kind of tips do you have to help them kind of improve their relationship and kind of make everything work around that type A-ness?
Believe it or not, John, that's a question I get a lot, actually. You find yourself interacting with someone who demonstrates some of these traits, There are lots of different things that you can do to connect with this person and find some common ground. So maybe this means bringing some of your experiences that you've had to the table and opening that door for discussion. That could look like, I noticed you get really excited when you accomplish one of your goals. Is there a way that we could come together to create a common goal and then work together as a team to achieve that? Or even sharing your own experiences, such as, I've noticed that goals are really motivating for you, but I haven't had that experience myself. Do you think that maybe we could work together to find something that motivates both of us so we're both excited about this thing that we're working toward together? Talking through these challenges can really give an opportunity to create change. Like I said, kind of flex our own comfort zone to understand what might motivate others and give them energy, and share what motivates us too.
Now, you had mentioned one of the characteristics sometimes that come out if you are a type A personality is an impatience with those around you that maybe aren't keeping the same pace, or aren't as driven, aren't meeting the deadlines, things like that. How do you kind of soften that rough edge when you're with somebody that's kind of displaying that sort of attitude? Or even if you're a type A person and you see it, what can you do?
Sure. Opening up that door. Like I said, having a conversation. So maybe perhaps if you're the person who is a little more quote unquote type B, that could look like level setting. Hey, I know you're really motivated by that timeline, but we actually have until next week. And you're putting a lot on my plate right now that I know I'll be able to get done by next week. So maybe we can reevaluate what the overall goal is so we're both happy and we both achieve this goal and don't feel like we're at each other's throats or not having a good relationship by the time we get there. And maybe if you're more type A, it might be asking that person, I'm feeling really stressed by this deadline, but you don't seem to be that stressed. Is there something that I'm missing here? And maybe we can find some level ground or some common ground to meet in the middle a little bit.
It seems like a lot of it is just understanding the people around you a little bit and giving them a little grace to be themselves, but then also trying to share like, hey, this is what that's doing to me. And then just being able to talk it through.
You're so right, John. And that's actually one of the things that I find to be most impactful whenever we are kind of taking inventory of different types of personality traits that we might have, or even doing different sorts of diagnostic tests or assessments meant to kind of tell us or give us insight into our own personality. I was recently in a training myself, and one of the most favorite things that the leader of this training said was, just because we get results that tell us something about ourselves doesn't mean that we can't have understanding for the other categories of personality types, right? These are things that aren't only meant to teach us about ourselves, but also meant to give us some insight into what other people are thinking, what might drive them, and help us to build those relationships too.
It's all about that give and take. And it seems that it can make the whole world a better place when that happens. So after all this talk, let me ask you this. Is being type A an official psychiatric diagnosis, or is this just something that makes for fun chatter and online personality quizzes?
So type A is certainly not a diagnosis that you'll receive from a mental health professional. And at times it can be a generalization for traits that a wide variety of people can experience in different contexts and in different situations in their lives. But what these traits can do is really give us good insight into what motivates us, drives us, and gives us energy, or kind of fills our cup, like I would like to say. And on the flip side, considering how this may be different for other people can help us to understand them better and can help us to, like we said, meet in the middle, gain some understanding, have that little bit of give and take. But if you ever have concerns over the way you're functioning, or you're finding that what used to drive and motivate you is now making you feel stressed or overwhelmed, there are certainly many different evidence-based methods to assess functioning and personality with a qualified mental health professional.
Well, as always, Dr. Tworek, you've given us a lot to think about. But before we say our goodbyes, do you have anything else to add about how we should view personalities that are type A, or I guess any other letter?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think one of my main takeaways is just like you've probably heard me say many times now, right? Is that these different factors can really drive us to strengthen relationships with people that we care about, right? So sometimes it is in our differences that we can actually find common ground and connect with other people that we care about.
Perfectly said, as always. So thank you again for making some time to talk with us today, and can't wait to have you back on.
Thanks so much, John. Talk soon.
Traits associated with a type A personality can drive success, but they can also fuel conflict and stress if they run wild. Work to find a better balance if you're feeling burnt out or overwhelmed. And if it helps with your type A-ness, just make adjusting your approach an ambitious goal to achieve. If you liked what you heard today, please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment to share your thoughts. Till next time, be well.